Let's get right to the White House. CNN's Elena Treen is there. So much happening, Elena, in just the last few hours. Give us the latest.
That's right. Let's start with tariffs, John, because, look, this is something that the president had threatened to do. He was moving forward to do it more than a month ago, and now it is here. It's something that still, even in the final hours yesterday, as they were leading up to this new deadline of this morning, people on Wall Street, people on Capitol Hill were still hoping, and certainly, of course, Ottawa and Beijing and Mexico City were hoping that the president wouldn't move forward with, but now he has. I'm just going to break down exactly what these tariffs are. One is that we know that he has implemented the 25% blanket tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Those took effect this morning. But then he also bumped up tariffs on China from 10% to 20%. And immediately, we've seen some of these countries retaliate with tariffs of their own. China, for example, retaliated by announcing 15% tariffs on chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton imports from the United States. They also announced a 10% tariff on soybeans, pork, beef, and other various goods. Canada, for their part, we heard Prime Minister Justin Trudeau say that they are going to have $30 billion or tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods, and that they would impose an additional $125 billion tariffs on American goods by March 25th. All to say, look, it's unclear how the markets are going to be impacted by this, but this is coming at a time when already you have a very inflation-weary Americans, many of whom do not want to be thrust into this trade war.
We've got Vanessa Yurkevich connecting us this hour from New York. Mark Stewart is in Beijing, and Paula Newton has reaction from Ottawa in Canada. Vanessa, let me start with you. Let's break down what we know about these tariffs first and foremost.
Well, certainly. We know now that there are tariffs in place on Canada and Mexico, 25% from all goods from Canada and Mexico coming into the United States, and an additional 10% on goods coming in from China into the U.S. right now. And this is critical because American consumers get a lot of things from these three major trading partners, things like oil, food, electronics, and cars. And we can expect that prices on these key commodities will rise. And we just learned moments ago that the president of Mexico announced that she will be putting retaliatory tariff and non-tariff measures in place starting on Sunday. We will learn what those are. But we've already heard from China, who is retaliating with 15% and 10% tariffs on agriculture exports coming from the U.S. going into China. And also similarly, Canada has put additional tariffs in place hitting agriculture products. And that is key for American farmers here because they were hit with retaliatory tariffs in 2018, so much so that the U.S. federal government had to provide financial assistance for them. So yet again, they are taking the brunt of these retaliatory tariffs here in the U.S. And for U.S. consumers, this is coming at a very shaky time economically. Consumer sentiment fell in the month of February. Inflation is starting to heat up. And these tariffs bring a lot of uncertainty in terms of prices. And then consumers usually, as prices rise, they start to pull back. And that has made Wall Street here very nervous. You mentioned at the open there that stocks closed, the markets closed, the Dow down by 650 points. Becky, wiping away all gains that were made since Trump was elected back in November. So there's a lot of uncertainty here playing out. Businesses are nervous, consumers are starting to become nervous, and we are really starting to see the beginning of a trade war. And I emphasize beginning because this could obviously only escalate from here, Becky.
Yep. And Mark, let me bring you in out of Beijing. Vanessa, thank you. China hitting back then on U.S. agriculture, and it says it won't be bullied. What more on the response from Beijing?
Right, Becky. I think the response from China is very sharp and it's very strategic. As Vanessa mentioned, in 2018, American farmers dealt with the hardships of tariffs. China has made this very calculated move to, again, target farmers, target people who work in food service, to target the agriculture industry. These are jobs, these are people in the United States who live in the Midwest, who live in the middle of America, the heartland. China knew exactly what it was doing. One item on the list of these various tariffs on agriculture products, tariffs that range in anywhere from about 10 to 15% in addition to what we've already seen, are soybeans. Soybeans are important here in China because they are used to feed pigs. Pigs make up the pork industry, a very important commodity, a very important part of the Chinese economy. But it's not just these tariffs. It's the language that we are hearing from the Chinese government, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The response today, it's a lot more pointed than we've heard even just days ago. Take a listen to some of the remarks we heard just earlier today here from Beijing.
If the U.S. has ulterior motives and insists on waging a tariff war, trade war, or any other kind of war, China will fight the U.S. till the end. We advise the U.S. to put away its bullying face and return to the right track of dialogue and cooperation before it is too late.
None of this is truly a surprise. It's not a surprise move by Beijing, and certainly the United States isn't going to be that surprised by it. I've been talking to a number of sources who are both in diplomatic and economic circles, and the real question was, it wasn't if China was going to respond, it was when and just how strong of a response it would be. And now we have these actions from today. And Becky, as we've talked before, this very much falls in line with China's foreign policy playbook of tit for tat. You hurt me, I will hurt you back. And now China is responding in this very forceful way, Becky.
And perhaps we might have expected that from Beijing, as you rightly point out, Mark. Paula, let me bring you in. What we might not have expected 2 months ago is a tit-for-tat sort of trade war between the US and Canada. And today, Canada going so far as to suggest that it faces an existential threat from its neighbour. Walk us through what's been done out of the gate in response to these US tariffs. And Paula, what more could come from Canada?
Well, Becky, you bring up the salient point here, right? Canada has a free trade agreement that Donald Trump negotiated and signed in 2020. This is not China, someone that the U.S. Had considered an adversary. This is Canada, and really it is ripping up the trade book, if you will, for what they have negotiated already with allies. So what is Canada doing? Well, it is hitting back with 25% tariffs on goods like meat and vegetables, dairy products, alcohol. Think about it, Becky. Anything in the United States, and we're talking about things like bourbon or wine or beer, will get a 25% tariff. But more than that, many provinces here in Canada, I would say the majority, will now be taking U.S. alcohol off their shelves and refusing to sell it. This is the kind of trade war that we're in for right now. We do expect to hear from Prime Minister Trudeau at 10:30, giving us more details on all of this. But I do want to give you some insight into what is already going on both sides of the border. So right now, customs brokers on the border are trying to figure out, when they have a truck that comes in with their bill of shipment, what they must charge those companies that are now shipping from Canada into the United States. It is already leading to delays, but more than that, it is already changing the way people, businesses have basically designed all of their assembly, all of their inputs, and it is really wreaking havoc, as I'm hearing from some business owners already. Keep in mind, this morning, Becky, we have already had 2 top CEOs in the United States from both Best Buy and Target say that Americans will feel this in terms of not just the tariffs that the U.S. has put in, but the retaliatory tariffs from Canada and Mexico and China, that Americans will feel that in the coming days, not just weeks, but days. All of this to make clear that when we say the word tariff, what we could actually be talking about is inflation, because that is the way it's going to lead. What can Canada do next? We will find out more at 10:30. But one thing that is on the table is either adding a levy that Canada would charge more for the United States for any hydropower, gas, natural gas they take from Canada, so putting a levy on that, and also perhaps restricting supplies, which would be an incredibly serious move.